When determining range for a graph, the range runs along the y-axis from lowest to highest. So think mountain ranges tell you the heights of mountains. You have to start at the bottom of the mountain before you can climb to the peak. There are things called horizontal asymptotes that affect your range, but in this class, we're just going to worry about gaps. We're going to keep range super basic. And when you're writing in interval notation, use parentheses for your arrows on the endpoints, which would be positive or negative infinity, pointing up or down, and use parentheses for your open circles on the endpoints. Use brackets if you have a closed dot or a random spot on your graph. You'll see that in this example. So let's do a couple examples real quick. Let's find the range, determine the range. So range, you just have to look for gaps here, physical, vertical gaps, and there aren't any because this is a nice smooth line. So my range is just think I have to start at the bottom of the mountain and then get to the mountain peak. Sorry, these are hand drawn, so they are not very precise, but you got the picture, I hope. So the lowest part of my graph is at 1, and it goes all the way up to the peak at 7. Use a bracket at 1 because there's a closed dot, and it's an open circle here at 7. All right, it doesn't necessarily have to be your endpoints, what your range values are. So let's do this example. All right, range, you go from the bottom of the mountain to the top. So the lowest part of my mountain is either of these arrows is pointing down. So that implies that we're going all the way down to negative infinity. All right, the highest part of my mountain, it peaks right here at y equals 1. So my domain is the lowest to the highest. 1 is just a random spot on my graph because that just happens to be a peak. So you can think of it as this solid line here is drawn up of a bunch of really close together, closed in dots. So like this whole thing is just dot, 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 dot. So I need to use a bracket here. That's what I mean by this random places on the graph. So if there's not a specific open circle or an arrow there for infinity, you need to use a bracket for range. Okay, let's do this one. Here you have a gap that you have to worry about. So it's a vertical gap. So I have this piece and then I have this piece. There's two just separate curves. There's like a physical gap between them. So my range, I'm just going to have two portions to my range. This little bit, the lowest to the highest. So from -3 to -2, open circle, closed dot. And then there's a gap before I get to this other part of the mountain range. So I start at the bottom here, the lowest part, to get to the highest part, height. So from 1 to 5, the 1 was a closed-in dot, 5 is an open circle. We often put U's there if you have multiple intervals for your range or domain. All right, one last example. This one is kind of a trick example for you. There is a gap here, but it's a horizontal gap instead of a vertical gap. So it's not really affecting anything here. You just need to worry about the lowest part of my graph is right here at, what's that, -2.5. It doesn't have to be an endpoint. Remember, it could just be some random spot on your graph. And the highest part of my graph is right here at +2. I don't have to worry about having two intervals here because this little lowest to highest, this height here for this range is encompassed in this height here for this mountain range. So the lowest to the highest, the lowest came from just a random curved part on my graph, and the highest part came from this closed-in dot.